Okay, so I decided that as kind of a well, actually, this is the first place I opened my Pachad Yitzchok on Pesach, to be honest. But it also seems like a natural transition from Pesach, from putting to Pesach. Maimanun Ches, here on page Kufay Zayin, the first page of the handout, and you'll see obvious. Well, it'll be obvious why from the first line. Yaim B'Samech Elokim B'Anoshim. Wine provides happiness for men and actually, I'm sorry, for God and for men, which is a fascinating concept. Elokim in the Pachad in the pasuk would seem to mean that it is misameach noble people, as opposed to God, because God can't drink wine. But it's taken to understand that there's a simcha which is correlated between man and God, which is accomplished by wine. This is actually pasuk in Shoftim, Perek Tes, pasuk Yud Gimel, as it says in the references in the back of the Pachad Yitzchok. Anyway, mikan ein shira ela yain. Since wine provides simcha, so therefore shira must be said on wine. It's interesting because there's halacha in the opposite direction. You can't say psukim of shir hashirim, or particularly shir hashirim, but perhaps even others from Tanakh, on wine in a bar, because that's considered to be abusing the pasuk. In other words, you have to say the pasuk specifically in a context of holiness in order for it to be appropriate. But then when it's acquired to say psukim or something else in order to achieve a level of simcha, of true happiness, it's supposed to be done on wine. And shira el al yain. In the words which are coming up, we're going to explain. One of the explanations of this concept, Shamira Shira Yain Dafka, of saying wine on Shira. Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry. The Google document asked for permission. Let me go and give that permission. Sorry about that. I keep forgetting this every week. Okay, try it now. It should work. Let me know if it does or it does not. Good. Okay, good. So we're up to base. I didn't get very far yet. The showbreads, as they're translated in English, were placed in the Beis Hamikdash every week on Shabbos, and they were on the table from Shabbos to Shabbos. And it says that even though it was a whole week that it was on the table, there was a miracle which occurred. We find Shabashan Silukot, the time was taken off. It was as hot, as fresh as when it was placed on the table the Shabbos before. Says Rav Hutner, it certainly is not the case that this heat, which it preserved, or its flesh is preserved, comes for some aspect of pragmatic or practical reason that the bread should be fresh for the quantity of bread, the quantity of other bread. Not only that, Chachamim say those who want to become wealthy should point north, should direct themselves northwards during Shemona Esrei. Obviously, it doesn't mean literally north, it means northeast. When you're pointing east during Shemona Esrei, you're supposed to direct yourself a little bit northerly in order to correspond to the table of the Lechem HaPanim, which was in the Beis Hamikdash, which represented wealth. If you wanted to become smarter, you turn yourself a little bit to the south, southeast, which the menorah was in the south and the Beis Hamikdash. That represents wisdom. So depending on what you wanted to accomplish, you would slightly vary you could still today, slightly vary your stance during Shemona Esrei. The Simancha, and the way to remember, of course, about pointing north behind me do with wealth is that the shulchan, the table with the breads, was on the north. Batzafa. So we see that the influx of good in this world, it is some secret which has to do with the table, and the bread which is upon it. In Cain, if that's the case, it certainly must be the case that the heat of the lechem apanim, ashel shulchan, which is on the table, gives us an internal understanding how goodness is bestowed on the world. In other words, it can't just be so the Kohanim have fresh bread. They get fresh bread elsewhere. But it obviously has something to do with something integral to do with the mission of the Shulchan. The mission and purpose of the Shulchan was to bring down the influences of goodness and plenty to the world, so that heat, which the bread retained, its freshness, must have something to do with that influence as it comes down. Okay? Gimel, turning the page. We can explain this by prefacing our remarks with the pasuk says, He, God, said, and it came into being. He commanded, and it stood. Now, this actually is taken from, we say this in davening, but the pasuk itself is taken from Tehillim 33:9. But it's the Pesukei de Zimra in the morning. But in any event, there's a in this understanding pasuk, there's a great difference between the perception of the prevalent mode of thought, and the perception of the depth of the penetrating thought. Because based on the prevailing thought, the prevalent thought, these two psukim, talk about two different epics or periods or times in history. The beginning of the pasuk goes sekes. The beginning of the pasuk is about the time of creation, when things came into being. And that it says, He said, and it came into being. The end of the pasuk goes sekes. It's after the time of creation is past. So therefore, all you need to do is sustain that which already exists. So it says, and He commanded that it should be sustained after it was created. So He commanded the creation, and He commanded to sustain the creation after it was created. That's a simple understanding of the pasuk. But the more profound thought, it grasps the matter in its root. So keres and surveys its the entire matter of this pasuk with one glance. In other words, the beginning and end of the pasuk are not separate; they're not distinct. How so? The beginning and end are not divided in terms of two different statuses at two different times. Rather, both the beginning of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk, they're talking about the same situation and the same time. The only difference between the two of them is in a difference in aspect, in perspective on the same thing. And from the superficial perspective, which we see with our human eyes, that something continues to exist every moment. It's just a continuation of the existence of that thing from the moment before it. In other words, the continuity of existence is not something which is a radical and new thing. It's a continuation of whatever existed previously. To the naked eye, it seems that the novelty is only at the time that it came into being. And from there on in, it's only continuation. But if from the inner perspective, which looks at the secret of the matter, knows truly that all the Maaseh Bereshis are renewed every moment out of the great goodness of the life force of the world, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we say in davening. Maaseh Bereshis constantly renews the creation every day. Everything is renewed every moment. when in the light of these different understandings, these different perceptions, reality is an image within an image, or form within a form. How's that? Hadmusa pnim is the inner form and inner essence of creation. Mischadesheti b'chol rega is renewed every moment. But min ha'ayin el hayesh, from ex nihilo to substance. In other words, everything is created every moment afresh, even though it seems to us it's a continuity. El shadmus pnimi zu, because this inner aspect, this inner form, miskasesi, is covered b'dmus chitzonis, with the outer form, sheyesh to maresh shek, which seems to show that things continue to exist from the moment previously. It's not something new, it's something which is continues, which is old, which just is sustained. Shivcho shel Moshe, Dalet. The praise of Moshe, Shnei love, about it says him at the end of his life, almost the end of the term, Parshas Vayelach, Kilo Kasa Eino V'lo Naslicho. His no, it says a bracha. That his eyes had not dimmed and his moisture, his vigor, had not subsided. Biurohu. What does this mean to say? They go down Madrigoso because of his great high level. I said the Musa Pnimis. It's a very fascinating Rav. His inner essence, Bokas, broke out. Gam l'tochad Musa Chitzonis Shel Hemshech, even to his outer form of continuity. In other words, most people, even if they are constantly renewing themselves internally and constantly in the state of chidush, and their outer selves, they look like they're a day older. They're the same person we were yesterday, plus a day, plus a month, plus a year. The newness is not recognizable in their countenance, in their life, in who they are superficially. But on Moshe Rabbeinu's wasn't true. Moshe Rabbeinu, every day, the newness and freshness was manifest on him. But Ulfi Smatusa Erech, in a smaller scale, we find this with every Talmid Chacham. Sharei al Talmid Chacham stam nemar, because even on a generic Talmid Chacham it says, Ki datoni tvosefes olav, he gets more das, more wisdom, koz manchim izdakin, the older he gets. And powerful words by Rav Hutner, that the most delicate existence shall come to us of all of reality, kula, in its entirety, hadas shel Talmid Chacham. This is the most delicate and refined aspect of reality, is the das, the intellect, the internal essence of, obviously, a true Talmid Chacham. The Lufi Erech Musosha Kol Metzius, and based on the relative loftiness of every existence, Kenu Erech Midas Shiltona, that is the extent to which there is a control or effect, Shalad Musa Pnimis, of the inner essence, the inner form, Al Gabi Ad Musa Chitzonis, on the outer form. Eleb Shebechol Talmidei Chachamim. However, every time Chacham ain't Shilton Zem is Galel B'Koach Hadash Lo Bilvad. Every time Chacham, you can only see that in their intellect. In other words, in an intellectual rapport, an intellectual transaction with a Talmid Chacham, you should be able to tell that he still has this freshness, this newness, which pervades his intellect even as he grows older. And hopefully he grows wiser. So therefore it is new. It is something which is every day. It's like something new and something higher than it was the day before. But it's only in intellectual transaction. Varabus of Moshe Rabbeinu, the chiddush, the novelty of Moshe Rabbeinu, who he was sheyeshilton zebokea v'yored alevore gufo mamish, that this governance of newness over him broke out and went down and out and manifests itself in the limbs of his body, in his actual physical essence. Vai ein super comedy Obamas now he's becomes a kanti Sarah Loma Morovadok. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to there, but it's interesting language. That's when the Nari Easy comes, there's the dialogue there between various different Malachim and Hashem and the Sarah Olam, the master of the world, whoever that angel is, says, I was a child and I got old. So Nari Easy comes a Kanti, the master of the world is to be a Nar and a Zucking together. In other words, to have Hitnarut, which is to be able to shake oneself out, to shake oneself up, even when one is a zaki. And this is what we said, deeper thought. So keresi b'skir achas, it takes in one glance. And stay above us both phrases. Shall pasuk yu marvei hutzivav yamor. This pasuk that he said and came to being, he commanded, and it is sustained. Gama mida, both the sustaining, Gama Yisavus, and also the creating. Shayachos hein losa matzav losa shah, they can be occurring at the same time and in the same situation. Elo sheimei madvarim, but normally it's not so simple. Yisavus bifnim, the recreation which is internal, mechuseh b'hemshech mibachutz, is covered with continuity on the outside. The renewal is internal, the external is the continuity. That's normally the case. Things function on two levels simultaneously. We're going to draw this line further. It's several times explained everything which happens in the base of Mikdash, they correspond with correspondence. To the inner workings of the higher, supernal, as we say in English, the more angelic and spiritual worlds. In other words, there's a direct correspondence. Rav Hutner elsewhere says that the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash were like miniatures of the world. So therefore, just like a miniature has a component which corresponds to each and every aspect of the actual entity, of which it is the miniature, so the Beis HaMikdash has aspects and components of it which correspond to each aspect of reality and have an impact or represent that reality in some way, shape, or form. So there, the bread, the showbread, asher shmo morel pnimiuso. Oh, what does lechem hapanim mean? It could also mean the bread of the face, but also can mean the inner bread. Lechem hapnim, the bread of pnimius. Nizbatlo legamre, in that case, since it was reflected, its inner essence, its pnimius, on its chitzonius, its inner essence was reflected on its outer existence, on its countenance, on the facade. So therefore, nizbatlo legamre adusa chitzonius shotziva v'yamod. There was totally canceled the concept of it is sustained. In other words, it's not that the bread came into existence and it was fresh at that point, and then it was sustained over time. And of course, something which is sustained over time becomes less warm, becomes cooler, becomes perhaps even over time still. But the lechem hapanim was indicated the freshness all the time in order to indicate the renewal at all time. That there's this renewal involved with the lechem hapanim. So therefore the outer facade of the command and sustain is cancelled. And rather there ruled, controlled this existence completely. The inner essence, the inner form of God said, and it came to be. To the point that it was fulfilled in the lechem hapanim, that when it was taken off, it was like when it was put on, and it was warm like it was warm on the day it was taken as the day it was put on. Okay, well, we'll expand on this in a moment. We find by Yosef in Bereshis, that Yaakov sent it from the goodness of Mitzrayim. The Chacham says, and what's the good stuff in Egypt, which Yosef said to Yaakov? So Chazal say, Rashi brings down there in the Chumash, old wine, aged wine. Shadas chachamim nochamim l'tzkei nochamenu, which the das, the mindset, it's not intellect, but let's say mindset or the mindfulness of an elderly person is relaxed, is calm, is appeased, is made happy by this good old wine. Wine has that effect. And what is this calmness, this tranquility, or whatever this does to the zaken? Sheyesh bir na inyan anaycha zu sheyesh lo ladash shos kenim yan yosher davka. This the state of naicha, I won't even try to translate it, which the mind of an elder has from specifically old wine. It's because wine has a special advantage. Because even in its outer essence, its outer nature, there is a revelation of its inner nature. In other words, wine represents this notion. The bread in the Beis Hamikdash represented this notion of the renewal in an overt way. And I want to come back to that now, as I said I would. It represents the renewal of Parnasa. Even though you think that the Parnasa you get today is as a result of yesterday's Hishtadlus, yesterday's efforts, Chazal say, no, somebody who has what to eat today and says, what am I going to eat tomorrow? Lacks emunah. Every day is its own new Parnasa, it's its own new sustenance. I'm not in that madrega, but that's what Chazal say. So therefore, every day is a renewal. It's not because you had a job yesterday, you have a job today. Maybe you have a job yesterday, it's today you're going to be fired. Or maybe yesterday you had this job, and tomorrow you had that job. Or maybe yesterday you were able to make this much money, today that much money. We don't see it. But every day the Parnasa is renewed. There's a new, so to speak, hashpah, influence from Shamayim, whether it was dictated in Rosh Hashanah or was dictated today, what is going to be with my Parnasa. So therefore, the bread in the Beis Hamikdash on the Shulchan, which represents Parnasa, which represents material substance in this world, was always fresh to convey the message. It's always something you should daven for, something you should have trust in God for, something which is constantly being renewed. But that was only in the Beis Hamikdash. Any bread outside the Beis Hamikdash gets stale after a week. But wine is then the only substance in this world, perhaps, I don't know if it's only, but it's the most manifest, in which when the more older it gets, the better it gets. In other words, the more you age the wine, the more tasty the wine, the more complex the wine, the more expensive the wine. So therefore, this the newness of the constant renewal is manifest in wine more than any other substance. Yain Yoshan specifically. So let's see it inside. Because even in its external nature, there's a revelation of its inner aspect. And now, which is mentioned previously, of constant renewal. Because it gets better, because it gets older. An older wine is better than newer wine. This doesn't exist elsewhere. Therefore, a das shel as kanim. So therefore, the das, the mindset of a true zaken, we know Chazal say a zaken is zesh kana chachma, an elder, but a wise elder, sagacious elder, person who is a sage in the true sense of a Talmid Chacham. Which God's supposed to get stronger because of old age. In other words, datan shells kanim mitva sefes aleim. If they get more das as time goes by. To emes itam shel nachas ruach, it feels a feeling of satisfaction, of tranquility, of happiness, of elation. She margisha ki gam b'teva chushim, when it senses that even in the nature which one can sense with one's five senses, yesh chok magbilas kulas haruchnis, there's some law which corresponds to their spiritual law. In other words, it's some quality in wine which is similar to the quality of old age. So therefore, when the mind of the elder meets up with the old wine. It creates a state of tranquility and satisfaction. That's why it says it's that Yosef sent Yaakov old wine, which gives this sense of tranquility or of peace or of calmness or even of happiness to the Zakanim. Now, Rav Hutner here is combining in a very, very condensed way the metaphysical with the physical, obviously in ways which are kind of shocking, because the Zaken is supposed to make that connection with the old wine. Does he make it with his tongue? Does he make it with his the nerve endings in his brain? Does he make it with his rational processes in thought? How does that connection occur? But that's not what concerns Rav Hutner. The connection evidently occurs, and that connection has to be understood in its metaphysical essence. In other words, what the nuts and bolts are of the connection between Yain Yashan and this Canaan. How imbibing the wine actually has that impact, it's a separate thing. But let's look at the metaphysical properties which they have, property of Das Canaan, and let's look at the physical properties of wine and see the parallel and see that therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu must have implanted some way in the Bria in which these two things correspond. It's not relevant to us how. But the correspondence is beautiful. Correspondence is extraordinary. Finally, the last paragraph. We're ready to go back to the beginning where we began. Chazal say, Ein omrim shira el al yain. You only say, sing to Hashem over wine. Why is that? So it's because, as if out to glicken, Zuckman kein shira nisht. On old happenings of good luck, when one had a good mazel, a glick, you don't say it's a sing a shira. You don't sing. You don't sing over stuff which is old. It doesn't provoke that elation anymore. It doesn't provoke that joyousness. And like the Chacham said, I'm not sure which Chacham this is. Maybe it says in the back. No, it doesn't say here. But I know Rav Kook says something about this because I quote it all the time. That anybody who says hell every day is like a blasphemer because you can't be on high every day. So I assume that this is a similar idea, although I don't know when it says Chacham. It probably this way of phrasing it is not necessarily from a Jewish source, but it's this idea of there's no such thing as a constant pleasure, and therefore there's no such thing as constant song, because song is based on newness, and one in this world cannot sense constant newness. The concept of renewal is not present because we live in a superficial world. And in a superficial world, things seem to be sustained and ongoing the way they were yesterday and today, and tomorrow they'll be the same. So therefore, Shira can't be said on something which happened in the past, which is dead and buried, so to speak, or even something which you have a fond memory of, but it's not experiential. Song comes from a sense of newness, of excitement, which comes with the new thing, whether it's a new salvation, a new attainment, or a new episode of good luck. That's what gives a person the power, the inspiration, the spirit to sing. So the inner essence of newness when it comes to take form in this world, in the senses of this world. In other words, here we are on Pesach, and we're going to have the Arba Kosos. Why do we have to have the Arba Kosos? Why do Chacham want us to have the Arba Kosos? Ain't only Shir Yain. You only say song on wine. Why? What's the point? Just sing the songs. So you can sing Dayenu without drinking wine, right? You can sing Kiddush without drinking wine. No, because we want you to have some experience, something in which the newness is perceived even in the oldness. How new perceptions come in things which are old, and on the contrary, the age provokes new perceptions. And therefore, Yetzias Mitzrayim, which I celebrated last year, and the year before, and the year before that, and Klal Yisrael will celebrate for thousands of years. But every year there could be a new inspiration, a new understanding, something new on which you say song. And the wine, again, in ways we don't necessarily have to understand, provokes that sense within the neshama, because it's a sensual reproduction of how a person's mindset internally is supposed to work. I want to add something which he doesn't mention here, but is well known about Pesach, that the word Pesach is from the two combination of the two words Peh and Sach, which means the mouth speaks, and Reb Tzadok says that one of the Ikar mitzvos, if not the Ikar mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, of telling over the story of the Exodus, is to come up every year with a new insight. The mouth is given the permission to express, so to speak, new insight. That, so to speak, is the wrong place. So to speak, the mouth is given permission the night of Pesach to express new insights which it never experienced or never had before each and every year. And that corresponds to the wine, which even though it's being used, it's old, it's new. Agada, Pesach, it's old, it's new. The wine brings this message. It brings happiness to people who are not feeling that newness. It brings happiness, obviously, in many different ways, and that's why Purim is related to Pesach. But the idea of wine, the sod of wine, is that it has this newness attached to it. And that's why you only say song over wine. Okay, that was a pretty profound piece, and it was a good piece, and food for thought, actually drink for thought, I guess. And Yirtzeh Hashem will do another piece next Sunday night. And that's it for tonight. Have a good night.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.